That flight attendant had no idea who she had just messed with. A slap, a gasp, and a billion-dollar secret about to explode at 35,000 feet. Buckle up. This is about to get turbulent. The plane hummed softly as it soared through the sky, but the tension in first class was anything but smooth. Naomi Carter, a stunning black woman in a sleek designer pantsuit, had just taken her seat in 1A, the most exclusive spot on the private airline she owned. She had boarded quietly, like she always did, avoiding unnecessary attention. No entourage, no flashy jewelry. Just herself, a simple black Hermes handbag, and the confidence of a woman who built an empire from the ground up. She was used to being underestimated. In fact, she liked it, but some people took it too far. "Excuse me, ma'am," a clipped, irritated voice said from above. Naomi barely had time to look up before a perfectly manicured hand yanked her designer tote from the seat next to her and shoved it into the overhead bin. First-class passengers only are allowed in this section. The flight attendant sneered, her sharp blue eyes scanning Naomi's simple but elegant outfit with obvious disdain. "You need to move?" Naomi raised an eyebrow. "I'm in first class?" The flight attendant's lips curled. "Sweetheart, this seat isn't for..." Naomi cut her off. "For who?" There was a flicker of hesitation, but the woman doubled down. "For people who belong here." Naomi's jaw tightened. The flight attendant was about to learn the hardest lesson of her life. "I paid for this seat," Naomi said, keeping her voice calm but firm. "In fact, I said move." The flight attendant reached for Naomi's arm. And that's when it happened. A sharp crack echoed through the cabin as the woman's palm met Naomi's cheek. The slap wasn't even the worst part. It was the audacity. For a moment, there was silence. Other passengers turned, eyes wide, waiting for Naomi's reaction. Naomi didn't move. She didn't even touch her face. She just stared. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," Naomi said softly. The flight attendant scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, please. You think complaining is going to get me fired? Good luck with that." Naomi exhaled slowly, smoothing out her pantsuit. Then she reached in her handbag and pulled out her phone. A single text. One word. Sent. The plane lurched slightly as the intercom buzzed to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay," the pilot's nervous voice crackled. "We've received direct orders from ownership to immediately return to the airport, and some personnel changes will be made upon landing." Naomi smiled. The flight attendant paled. You can't be serious," she stammered. Naomi stood up, her presence filling the cabin. She leaned in just close enough to whisper, "Sweetheart, I own this plane." The flight attendant's face drained of color, her smug expression crumbling like a house of cards in a hurricane. You're lying," she stammered, her fingers trembling slightly as she clutched her clipboard. Naomi simply tilted her head, amusement dancing in her eyes. "Am I?" The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom again. "All flight attendants, please report to the cockpit immediately." Repeat. "All flight attendants now." The woman's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Naomi could see the wheels in her head turning, the slow, horrifying realization setting in that she had just slapped the billionaire owner of the very airline she worked for. Passengers were staring now. A man in a tailored suit nudged his wife and whispered, "That's Naomi Carter." The whisper spread like wildfire. Naomi turned her attention back to the flight attendant. "What's your name?" The woman swallowed hard. Karen." Naomi almost laughed at the irony. "Karen, I assume you've worked for my airline for a while?" Karen nodded frantically. "Why, yes. 6 years. I'm one of the top attendants." Naomi arched a brow. "And in those 6 years, you never once thought to learn who signs your checks?" Karen's lips parted, but no sound came out. She was spiraling, her mind desperately searching for a way out. "You slapped me," Naomi continued, her voice low and controlled. "You assaulted the owner of this plane, of this entire airline, because you assumed I didn't belong here." Karen shook her head rapidly. No, it was a misunderstanding. I thought." "You thought what?" Naomi cut in, her voice laced with ice. "That a black woman in first class couldn't possibly afford to be here." Karen's silence was all the confirmation Naomi needed. The flight attendant standing beside Karen, a younger woman with dark hair, nervously shuffled her feet. "Miss Carter, I didn't know it was you either, but I—" Naomi turned to her. "Did you put your hands on me?" The woman gulped and shook her head. "Then we don't have a problem," Naomi said smoothly. She looked back at Karen. "You, however?" The cockpit door swung open, and the lead pilot stepped out. His uniform was crisp, his expression unreadable as he approached Naomi. "Miss Carter," he said respectfully, "we've initiated an emergency turnaround as per your request. We'll be landing shortly." "Thank you, Captain." Naomi nodded. Karen grabbed onto the pilot's arm desperately. "You can't, please, I need this job. I have a family, a mortgage." "I wasn't thinking." Naomi's jaw clenched. Oh, now she wanted to humanize herself? "You weren't thinking when you assumed I didn't belong," Naomi said, her voice sharp but measured. "You weren't thinking when you put your hands on me. You weren't thinking when you used your authority to humiliate me in front of a plane full of people." Karen's lip trembled. Naomi sighed. "I don't take pleasure in firing people, Karen, but actions have consequences." Tears welled in Karen's eyes. "Please." Naomi inhaled slowly, letting the moment hang in the air. Finally, she said, "You're done working for me. Whether you work for someone else after this, that's not my concern." The message was clear. Karen stumbled back, her face twisting in devastation as she realized her career had just ended at 35,000 feet. Naomi turned away, smoothing her pantsuit before settling back into her seat. She wasn't angry anymore, just exhausted. The pilot gave her a nod before heading back into the cockpit. The younger flight attendant hesitated, then leaned down. "For what it's worth," she whispered, "I'm really sorry for how she treated you." Naomi studied the woman's face for a moment, then gave a small nod of acknowledgement. "Thank you." The plane began its descent. Karen stood frozen, her hands shaking. "And Naomi?" She simply fastened her seatbelt, looking out the window as the city lights came into view. The descent felt longer than usual, but Naomi didn't mind. She sat comfortably, legs crossed, watching the city lights below grow larger as the plane approached the runway. The quiet hum of the engines contrasted sharply with the chaos happening just a few feet away. Karen was still standing there, her eyes darting around the cabin as if looking for an escape. The realization of what she had done, what it had cost her, was settling in like a lead weight on her shoulders. Naomi exhaled slowly. She had seen this before. The panic, the regret, the desperate attempts to fix something that was beyond repair. But the truth was, she didn't care. Not anymore. Karen wasn't sorry for what she had done. She was sorry she had done it to the wrong person. The plane touched down smoothly, the soft jolt pulling Naomi from her thoughts. A few passengers turned their heads, murmuring amongst themselves. Everyone had witnessed what happened, and the tension still lingered in the air like an unspoken storm. As the plane taxied to a stop, the intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived. Please remain seated until we come to a full stop. Thank you for your cooperation." The moment the plane halted, Karen practically lunged toward Naomi. "Please, Miss Carter, I will do anything." Naomi didn't even flinch. She simply lifted a hand, palm facing forward. "Stop." Karen froze, her breath ragged. Naomi slowly unbuckled her seatbelt and stood, adjusting her blazer. "What do you think would have happened if I wasn't Naomi Carter? If I was just a regular black woman flying in first class?" Karen blinked, caught off guard by the question. Naomi let the silence stretch between them. "You wouldn't be begging for your job right now. You'd be defending your actions. Maybe you'd even be bragging to the other flight attendants about putting someone in their place." Karen's eyes darted away. "Don't bother lying," Naomi continued, "because that's exactly why this happened. Not because you made a mistake, but because you thought you could." A deep, heavy silence followed. Karen opened her mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to plead, but Naomi had already turned away. The doors of the plane opened, and Naomi was greeted by two suited men, her personal assistants already waiting. "Miss Carter," one of them said with a nod. "We have security waiting outside." Naomi gave a tired smile. "That won't be necessary." She walked down the aisle with effortless grace, feeling the weight of 100 eyes on her. Whispers followed her like shadows, but she didn't acknowledge them. As she stepped out of the plane, the crisp night air hit her skin. A sleek black Rolls-Royce was already parked by the private terminal, a chauffeur standing by. One of her assistants leaned in. "Would you like us to handle her?" he asked, nodding toward the plane. Naomi glanced back. Karen stood in the doorway, her posture deflated, her hands gripping the frame like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Naomi held her gaze for a moment before sighing. She's already handled herself. Without another word, Naomi slid into the Rolls-Royce, the door shutting with a soft click. As the car pulled away, she closed her eyes and exhaled. Another day, another lesson taught, and another person who learned the hard way: never underestimate a black woman. The city skyline blurred past as Naomi leaned back against the plush leather of her Rolls-Royce, fingers idly tracing the cool metal of her phone. Normally, after a flight, she would take a deep breath, sip on a glass of wine, and enjoy the quiet ride home. But tonight her mind was still wired. Karen's voice, her panicked pleas, echoed in her head, but Naomi quickly shoved the thoughts aside. She had been through too much in life to waste time on guilt. Her phone buzzed. "Marcus, heard what happened. You good?" Naomi smirked. Marcus Wright, her business partner, best friend, and the only person who could check her without losing his teeth. She texted back, "Naomi, I'm always good." Marcus lies. "But we'll talk." She shook her head, amused. He knew her too well. The car pulled up to the entrance of her penthouse building, a sleek glass tower that screamed luxury. The doorman rushed forward, opening her door with a polite nod. "Welcome home, Miss Carter." She stepped out smoothly, her heels clicking against the marble driveway. The night air was cool, the city alive with energy, but inside her world, everything was silent. As she entered the private elevator, she finally let out a long breath. The doors slid shut, enclosing her in solitude. Then, just as she was about to close her eyes, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Her instincts flared. She rarely got calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Curious, she answered. "Who is this?" Silence. Then a slow, deliberate inhale on the other end. "Miss Carter," a deep, measured voice said. "You don't know me, but we need to talk." Naomi's pulse remained steady, but her grip on the phone tightened. She had dealt with enough powerful men in back rooms and boardrooms to recognize when someone was choosing their words carefully. "And why would I waste my time doing that?" she asked coolly. A small chuckle. "Because I know what really happened on that flight. And I know this isn't over." The elevator doors opened to her penthouse. She stepped out, eyes narrowing as she stared out at the glittering city skyline. "Start talking," she said. The line went dead. Naomi lowered her phone slowly. Something was off. She had handled Karen. She had handled the flight. But now, for the first time tonight, she had the sinking feeling that someone else was trying to handle her. And that was a mistake. Naomi stood frozen for a moment, the city lights casting long shadows across her penthouse floor. The call had ended, but the tension in her body hadn't. She had dealt with powerful people before. Rivals, haters, envious competitors. But something about that voice, the calculated way he spoke, unsettled her. Who exactly knew about what happened on that flight? And why did it feel like a threat? She exhaled sharply, rolling her shoulders back. She wasn't about to let some mystery caller shake her. If they wanted to talk, they could come find her. And if they wanted to fight, she'd give them one. Tossing her phone on the marble countertop, she grabbed a glass and poured herself a deep red Merlot. Just as she brought it to her lips, the phone rang again. Same unknown number. She debated ignoring it but sighed, setting her wine down with an annoyed clink. This time, she answered with even more steel in her voice. "You have 5 seconds before I hang up." A small pause. Then the voice returned, deep and smooth. "You don't waste time, do you?" For seconds, a chuckle. "All right, I'll get to it. Karen didn't just get fired. She's filing a lawsuit against your airline. Claims of racial discrimination and wrongful termination." Naomi's blood ran cold for a split second. That woman had the audacity. "That's a bold lie," Naomi said icily. She was the one discriminating. I know that. You know that. But the media? Another short pause. They love a good scandal, Naomi. Naomi's jaw clenched. This wasn't just a petty attempt at revenge. This was an orchestrated attack. Who the hell are you? She demanded. A friend, he said casually. One who thinks you need to be careful. Karen isn't working alone. Her grip on the phone tightened. What do you mean? She's got backing. Big backing. Investors who don't like you shaking up the airline industry. Naomi swallowed her anger, now fully aware this wasn't about Karen at all. This was about power, and the people who wanted her gone. She took a slow breath. And what do you get out of warning me? A pause. Then, the voice lowered. Let's just say, I have my reasons for not wanting to see you lose this fight. The call clicked dead. Naomi stared at her phone, her mind racing. Karen was a pawn, a distraction. The real battle? It was coming. And Naomi Carter? She never lost. Naomi stood still, her grip on the phone tightening. The pieces were coming together now. This wasn't just about Karen. This was about them, the investors, the powerful men in boardrooms who had underestimated her from the moment she bought into the airline industry. The ones who smiled in her face while plotting behind her back. They had been waiting for her to slip, and now they thought they had their moment. She grabbed her phone and dialed a number she rarely used. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Well, if it isn't the Queen herself. Cut the bullshit, Marcus, Naomi snapped, pacing toward the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse. I need you to dig into something. A pause. Then, in a more serious tone, Marcus said, What happened? She told him everything. The slap, the firing, the unknown caller. By the time she finished, she could practically hear Marcus rubbing his temples. Damn, they're really coming for you? No kidding, Naomi muttered. I need to know who's backing Karen. Who's trying to use her to bring me down? On it? But Naomi, be careful. These people don't play fair. Naomi smirked, swirling her untouched glass of wine. Neither do I. She ended the call and turned back to her city. They thought they could back her into a corner. Thought they could smear her name, turn public opinion, force her to sell. They must have forgotten she was the one who built this empire, and she'd burn it all to the ground before she let anyone take it from her. The next morning, the storm hit. Naomi woke up to her phone buzzing nonstop. Headlines, tweets, news alerts. Naomi Carter accused of discrimination against white employee. Former flight attendant speaks out. I was humiliated and fired without cause. Billionaire CEO under fire for alleged unfair practices. Naomi let out a bitter laugh. They really flipped the script on her. Her assistant, Jordan, called immediately. Boss, we have a problem. I see that. Karen just did a live interview. She's playing the victim card hard. Tears and everything. Naomi exhaled slowly. Send me the video. Seconds later, a link popped up. She clicked it. On screen, Karen sat in a studio, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. I gave 6 years to that airline, she sniffled. I love my job. I love serving people. And then, out of nowhere, I was fired. The interviewer, a sharp-looking woman, leaned in. And why do you think that happened, Karen? Karen hesitated, just for effect. Then she sighed. Honestly, I think Naomi Carter wanted to make an example out of me. I think she didn't like that I stood up to her. And now, I'm left with nothing. Naomi clenched her jaw. This wasn't just an attack. This was a setup, and she was about to dismantle it, piece by piece. Naomi tossed her phone onto the table, barely resisting the urge to throw it across the room. Karen was good, too good. The trembling voice, the strategically placed tears, the slight hesitation before dropping Naomi's name like a bomb. This wasn't just some emotional ex-employee lashing out. This was coached. Someone was pulling the strings. Her assistant, Jordan, was still on the line, breathing heavily. Boss, what do you want me to do? Should I start drafting a statement? Naomi pressed her fingers against her temples. She knew how this worked. If she released some corporate, watered-down response, it would do nothing. The media already had their angle. Billionaire black CEO bullies and fires hardworking white flight attendant. It didn't matter that Karen was the one who assaulted her. The narrative had been flipped, and public sympathy was now squarely on Karen's side. I'm not making a statement, Naomi said. Jordan hesitated. You sure? The board is already getting nervous. Stock took a small hit. I don't care about the stock, Naomi interrupted. I care about who's funding this mess. Find out who's backing Karen. Who paid for that interview? Who set it up? I want names. Jordan exhaled sharply. Understood. I'll get back to you soon. Naomi ended the call and let silence settle around her. Then she dialed another number. Marcus picked up immediately. Tell me you're not watching the news. Oh, I'm watching, Naomi said, her voice calm. Too calm. You get anything yet? Marcus sighed. I've got whispers. Some of your competitors want you out of the airline business. But I dug deeper. And Marcus hesitated. It's Brandon Caldwell. Naomi's fingers tightened around the phone. Brandon. F*** King. Caldwell. A name she hadn't heard in years, but one that still sent a slow burn of anger through her veins. He was the CEO of a rival airline, one of the old money types. A privileged silver spoon brat who inherited his father's airline and had spent years trying to block Naomi from entering the industry. He never took her seriously. And now he was trying to take her down. Naomi let out a slow breath. So he's the one bankrolling Karen? Looks that way, Marcus confirmed. And trust me, he's not done. He's got political friends, media connections. If you don't shut this down fast, they're going to smear you until you've got no choice but to sell. Naomi smirked, rolling her shoulders. Oh, Marcus, do they really think they can make me quit? Marcus chuckled. I knew you'd say that. So what's the plan? Naomi stared out at the city skyline, her mind already working 3 steps ahead. They want a war, she murmured. Fine. She grabbed her phone and opened her contact list, scrolling until she found a name she hadn't used in a while. Richard Calloway, investigative journalist. She hit dial. Richard, she purred when he answered. How would you like to expose the real corruption in the airline industry? A pause. Then Richard chuckled. Miss Carter, you have my attention. Naomi smiled. Checkmate. Naomi leaned back in her chair, the city lights glinting in her eyes. Richard Calloway wasn't just any journalist. He was the kind of man who dug up dirt that left corporations in flames. And right now, she needed someone who could turn the tables. Brandon Caldwell, she said smoothly. He's behind the Karen stunt. He's bankrolling her lawsuit, feeding the media, and trying to push me out of the airline industry. Richard let out a low whistle. That's a hell of an accusation, Naomi. You got proof? Marcus is working on it, but I know how Brandon operates. This isn't the first time he's tried to shut me down. Richard chuckled. And yet here you are, still standing, still winning, Naomi corrected. And I intend to keep it that way. I just need you to do what you do best, start digging. Brandon isn't clean. He's been running his daddy's airline like an old boys club for years. There's dirt. I just need it brought to light. Richard was silent for a moment. Then he sighed. I like you, Naomi, and I really don't like Brandon. I'll see what I can find. She smirked. Let me know when you have something. The call ended, and Naomi sat back, exhaling slowly. Step 1? Set the trap. Now it was time for step 2. She pulled up her social media and began typing. A billionaire CEO firing a flight attendant over race? That's a great story. Too bad it's a lie. I hope the media enjoys what I drop tomorrow. Stay tuned. Hashtag the real story. She hit post, then leaned back with a satisfied smirk as her phone immediately started buzzing with notifications. They wanted to play dirty? She'd show them what a real fight looked like. Naomi woke up to chaos. Her name was everywhere. News anchors debated her tweet. Social media was on fire. People were demanding to know what she was about to expose. And then Richard delivered. A headline exploded across the internet like a bomb. Exclusive, Brandon Caldwell's airline faces racial discrimination lawsuit. Former employees speak out. Naomi clicked the link, smiling as she scrolled. Richard had done his job. The article exposed everything. Brandon's history of hiring only white executives, his company's pattern of denying promotions to black employees, the multiple lawsuits that had been quietly settled out of court. But the real cherry on top? A leaked email from Brandon himself, sent just days before Karen's interview, discussing the best way to push Naomi Carter out of the industry. Naomi's phone rang. Marcus. You are a damn genius, he said laughing. Brandon scrambling. His PR team's in meltdown mode. Naomi grinned. Good? He wanted a war. I just finished it. Hours later, Brandon finally issued a statement. He called the allegations unfounded and misconstrued, but the damage was done. His stock took a nosedive. His reputation? In flames. And Karen? Oh, Karen was silent. No more interviews. No more statements. Just silence. Naomi took a sip of wine, watching the chaos unfold on her TV. Powerful men always thought they could destroy her. They always learned the hard way. With a smirk, she muttered, "Checkmate." Naomi Carter was on top of the world. Brandon Caldwell's empire was crumbling. His airline stock had dropped 15% in just a few days, and shareholders were furious. Karen had gone completely silent, likely realizing she had been used and discarded. The lawsuit? Dead before it even started. But Naomi knew better than to relax. When powerful men lost, they didn't disappear. They plotted. And Brandon Caldwell? He wasn't done yet. Naomi had just stepped out of the shower when her phone buzzed. A blocked number. She smirked. "Here we go." "Brandon," she answered smoothly, towel still wrapped around her. "Didn't think you'd call me directly." His voice was low, seething. "You think this is over?" Naomi chuckled. "Oh, Brandon, it's already over. You just haven't accepted it yet. You really think exposing some old lawsuits makes you untouchable?" Brandon sneered. "I have friends, Naomi. Powerful ones." Naomi rolled her eyes. "You mean the same friends who cut ties with you this week? Face it, Brandon. You backed the wrong horse. Karen was a joke. And now, so are you." Silence. Then, Brandon's voice darkened. "Watch yourself, Carter. The game's not done yet." The line went dead. Naomi exhaled, setting the phone down. She wasn't worried, but something about his tone stuck with her. The game might have been over, but the war? It was just getting started. Jordan stormed in, face pale. "We have a problem." Naomi barely looked up from her laptop. "We always do." Jordan threw a tablet on the desk. "This one's big." Naomi glanced at the screen. Breaking news. Federal investigation launched into Naomi Carter's airline over unethical business practices. Her stomach dropped. "The feds?" Jordan nodded grimly. Brandon pulled major strings. "The Department of Transportation is investigating your airline. Rumors are flying that they might try to block your expansion into international routes." Naomi clenched her jaw. So this was Brandon's move. If he couldn't beat her publicly, he'd try to cripple her company from the inside. But he had no idea who he was messing with. She grabbed her phone and dialed Marcus. "We need to talk," she said. Marcus sighed. "I was waiting for your call. Meet me in an hour." And Naomi, "Yeah, you're about to get your hands dirty?" Naomi smirked. "Good." Naomi walked into the dimly lit lounge, her heels clicking against the marble floor. This wasn't the kind of place you just stumbled into. It was where power moved in whispers, where billion-dollar deals were made over whiskey and cigars. Marcus was already waiting in a secluded booth, scrolling through his phone. The second he saw Naomi, he stood and pulled her into a quick hug. "You all right?" he asked. Naomi slid into the seat across from him, waving down a waiter. "You tell me." Marcus exhaled and slid his phone across the table. Naomi glanced at the screen. An internal memo from the Department of Transportation. Investigation into Carter Aviation Holdings. Initiated by direct request of Senator Graham and associated lobbyists. Naomi's lips curled into a smirk. So Brandon really did call in favors. Marcus nodded. "This ain't just about your airline, Naomi. This is about keeping you out of the industry, for good." She leaned back, swirling the glass of whiskey the waiter had just placed in front of her. "Let them investigate. They won't find anything." Marcus hesitated. Naomi caught it instantly. "What?" He leaned in, lowering his voice. "Brandon doesn't need them to find anything, Naomi. He just needs them to stall you long enough to hurt your expansion." Her fingers tightened around the glass. She had spent years building her airline, buying up routes, negotiating international deals. If the feds put her company under a microscope, even with no evidence, it could freeze everything. And Brandon knew it. Naomi exhaled slowly. "All right, then we hit back." Marcus smirked. "I thought you'd say that. I might have something for you." He slid another document across the table. Naomi picked it up, scanning the contents. Then she froze. Her eyes flicked up. Where the hell did you get this? Marcus just grinned. Let's just say Brandon Caldwell isn't the only one with friends in high places. Naomi stared down at the papers again, her pulse picking up. Because this wasn't just dirt on Brandon. This was lethal. Naomi sat back on her couch, sipping champagne as CNN, MSNBC, and even Fox News blasted the headline across the screen. Brandon Caldwell's airline caught in multi-million-dollar fraud scandal. Federal investigation launched. Brandon's face was plastered across the news, looking pale and furious as he was bombarded with questions. The leaked documents, the ones Naomi now had possession of, exposed massive financial fraud within his airline. Overbilling, illegal labor practices, government bribes. Brandon had tried to weaponize the system against her. And now, the system had turned on him. Her phone buzzed. "Marcus, you see the news?" he asked, clearly grinning. Naomi smirked. "Of course. He's F*** kid," Marcus said. "His investors are bailing. The feds aren't just investigating him now. They're coming for his head." Naomi took another slow sip of champagne. "Good? That's it?" Marcus laughed. "No victory speech? No celebration?" Naomi smiled. "Oh, I'm celebrating." She stood, walking toward her penthouse window, watching the city lights flicker like stars below her. "But I'm also planning my next move." Brandon had made one mistake. He thought he was playing chess. Naomi Carter? She was playing a whole different game. The world had learned one thing about Naomi Carter she never lost. Brandon Caldwell thought he could bury her. She buried him instead. Now, she had her sights set on something even bigger. Global expansion. Carter Aviation Holdings was already dominating the domestic market, but Naomi wanted more. She was in negotiations to acquire a major European airline, a move that would make her one of the most powerful women in the industry. And that's why they were coming for her. Naomi sat at the head of a long glass conference table, staring at a contract that could change everything. "Once we close this deal, Carter Aviation will have control over 42% of transatlantic routes," Jordan said, flipping through the latest reports. "That's historic." Naomi nodded, but something felt off. Her instincts, the same instincts that made her a billionaire, were telling her someone was plotting against her. "Where are we with the EU approvals?" she asked. Jordan hesitated. "That's where things get complicated." Naomi raised a brow. "Complicated how?" Jordan exhaled. "The European Aviation Commission suddenly put your acquisition under special review." Naomi's jaw tightened. That wasn't on the table before. Who pulled those strings? Jordan slid a folder toward her. Naomi opened it. And there it was. Elliot. Fking. Harrington ***. The name alone made her stomach burn. The old money CEO of Harrington Airways. The same man who had spent years blocking her every move. A man who hated that she had built her own empire without his connections. And now, he was trying to kill her expansion before it even started. Naomi exhaled slowly, closing the folder. "Jordan," she said, her voice calm. "Set up a meeting." Jordan frowned. "With who?" Naomi's lips curled into a dangerous smirk. Elliot Harrington ***. If he wanted a war, she'd bring the fight straight to his doorstep. Naomi Carter stepped out of her sleek black Bentley, adjusting her sunglasses as she stared up at the towering steel and glass headquarters of Harrington Airways. She wasn't here to negotiate. She was here to take what was hers. "Ma'am, are you sure about this?" Jordan murmured beside her. "Harrington's not like Brandon Caldwell. He's smarter." Naomi cut in, smirking. "More connected? More ruthless?" Jordan hesitated. "Yes." "Good," Naomi said, striding forward. "So am I." Inside, the receptionist barely had time to process her arrival before Naomi was already walking toward the executive elevators. A security guard stepped in front of her. "Ma'am, do you have an appointment?" Naomi smiled. "I don't need one." The doors dinged open behind them, and a deep, smooth voice called out. "Let her through." Elliot. King. Harrington. The man himself stood in the elevator, hands casually in his pockets. He was older than Naomi, somewhere in his late 50s, but he carried himself with the arrogance of a man who had never been told no. He smirked. "I've been expecting you." Naomi stepped in without hesitation. "Then you know this isn't a social visit." Elliot chuckled as the doors closed. "Naomi Carter, walking into my headquarters like she owns the place. I have to say, I admire the confidence." Naomi folded her arms. "Confidence isn't required when you have leverage." Elliot's smirk didn't falter. "Leverage?" She pulled out a folder and handed it to him. "Go ahead," she said smoothly. "Take a look." Elliot opened it. His face didn't change, but Naomi could see the slight tension in his jaw. Inside were confidential documents, proof that Harrington Airways had been quietly paying off European regulators to stall Naomi's airline expansion. It was illegal as hell. And now, Naomi had receipts. She tilted her head, still feeling confident. Elliot closed the folder, exhaling through his nose. "I underestimated you." "Everyone does," Naomi said, stepping forward. "Now, here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell your friends in the European Aviation Commission to clear my acquisition." Immediately, Elliot studied her for a long moment. Then, instead of looking angry, he laughed. Naomi's eyes narrowed. "Something funny? You think I'm the only one standing in your way?" Elliot leaned in slightly, his voice dropping lower. "Naomi, you're not just fighting me. You're fighting an entire system that wasn't built for women like you." Naomi smiled. "Then it's time to burn the system down." The elevator doors slid open to his private office, revealing a breathtaking view of London. Elliot turned to face her fully. "You want a deal? Let's make one." Naomi arched a brow. "I don't make deals with men who try to bury me." Elliot smirked. "Then you'd better start digging, Naomi. Because if you're coming for me..." He stepped closer, eyes dark. "I'm coming for you, too." Naomi loved a challenge. "Good," she murmured. "I'd hate for this to be too easy." Naomi sat at the head of the conference table, arms folded, eyes sharp. Her best strategists, legal team, and financial advisors were gathered in the room, poring over everything they had on Elliot Harrington. A massive screen displayed the deal Naomi needed to close. Her acquisition of Skylux Airways, a European airline that would give Carter aviation dominance over international routes. But the deal was frozen, thanks to Elliot's backdoor corruption. Naomi tapped her manicured nails against the table. "Where are we on the regulators?" Jordan, seated beside her, sighed. "Still stalling. Harrington's people are pressuring the European Commission to block the acquisition on national security concerns." Naomi rolled her eyes. "National security? That's the best they've got." Marcus, dialing in via video call, leaned forward. "It's not about security, Naomi. It's about keeping you out. Elliot doesn't just want to stop this deal. He wants to make sure you never expand into Europe at all." Naomi's jaw clenched. She had two options: fight through the legal system, slow, expensive, and giving Elliot time to find new ways to sabotage her. Play the game dirtier than he did, and cripple him before he crippled her. Naomi smirked. "Then let's make sure he's too busy fighting his own fires to stop me." She turned to Marcus. "What's our move?" Marcus grinned. "We hit his weakest spot." Naomi sat in her penthouse, sipping a glass of wine as the news broke across every major network. Breaking: Harrington Airways under investigation for shady government contracts. Her sources had uncovered something beautiful. Elliot's airline had been inflating government contracts for years, pocketing millions in fraudulent deals. And now, the British government had launched an official inquiry. Naomi's phone buzzed. "Marcus, you see the news?" he asked, laughing. Naomi smirked. "Oh, I saw it." "Good, because Elliot's in panic mode. Investors are bailing. Regulators are breathing down his neck." Naomi took another slow sip of wine. "Then it's time for the kill shot." The next morning, Naomi Carter strode into a high-stakes boardroom meeting with the European Commission. Elliot was there, looking pale and furious, trying to keep control. Naomi sat across from him and smiled. "You wanted a war, Elliot," she murmured. "You just lost." She slid a final contract across the table. "I suggest you sign." Elliot's hand shook as he grabbed the pen. And just like that, Naomi Carter became the most powerful woman in aviation. Naomi Carter was used to winning. She had crushed Brandon Caldwell. She had dismantled Elliot Harrington. And now, She was one signature away from finalizing the biggest aviation expansion in decades. Carter Aviation was about to dominate international air travel, but she had made powerful enemies. And tonight, they made their first move. Naomi had just poured herself a drink when Jordan stormed in, his face pale. "Boss," he panted, "we have a problem." Naomi set down her glass, unbothered. "We always do." Jordan slammed his tablet onto the table. "Not like this." Naomi glanced down. Her stomach dropped. Leaked documents. Naomi Carter under federal investigation for fraud and corruption. The article claimed her airline had bribed international officials, a blatant lie. But the worst part? It was everywhere. CNN, BBC, even the Wall Street Journal. "They're trying to turn you into the villain," Jordan whispered. Naomi inhaled deeply. "Who leaked this?" Jordan hesitated. "I don't know." Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Naomi exhaled sharply and answered. "Talk." A deep, cold voice spoke. "Miss Carter," the man said, "you've climbed too high." Naomi's grip on the phone tightened. "Who the hell is this?" The man chuckled. "Your final warning." The line went dead. Naomi lowered her phone slowly. She wasn't just fighting corporate rivals anymore. She was facing the most powerful billionaires on the planet. And they wanted her gone. Naomi Carter didn't scare easily. She had taken down powerful men before. But this was something different. This wasn't just a smear campaign. This was a coordinated attack. A declaration of war from people who had never lost a battle. The old money cartel had been controlling global aviation for decades. They weren't just billionaires. They were kingmakers, the kind of people who dictated who succeeded and who disappeared. And they had just decided Naomi Carter needed to disappear. Jordan paced in front of the screen, flipping through the latest reports. "The news cycle isn't dying down," he muttered. "They're running the fraud story on repeat." Naomi leaned back in her chair, tapping her nails against the desk. "Any real evidence?" Jordan shook his head. "No, because it's bullshit." Then we pushed back. Marcus dialing in from London's side. "It's not that simple, Naomi. This isn't just bad press. Someone high up is pulling strings. Your accounts are being flagged. Regulators are reopening old audits, and banks are getting nervous." Naomi's jaw clenched. "Which means?" Marcus hesitated. "If this keeps up, they could freeze your assets." For the first time, a cold chill ran through Naomi's spine. She had billions. But money was only powerful if you could access it. "Who's leading this?" she asked, voice sharp. Jordan exhaled and slid a file across the table. Naomi picked it up, flipping through the pages. And then she stilled. At the top of the file was a name she knew too well. Maxwell Rothschild. Old money. $1 trillion family. A man who had been running the aviation industry long before Naomi even stepped foot in it. Jordan spoke carefully. "Maxwell's been lobbying behind the scenes to block your international expansion for years. But now, he's decided you're a threat." Naomi slowly closed the file. This wasn't about business anymore. Maxwell Rothschild was making it personal. And Naomi Carter? She never lost a personal war. She turned to Marcus. Set up a meeting. Marcus hesitated. "With Rothschild?" Naomi smirked. "No, with the people who want him gone." If Maxwell thought he was untouchable, he was about to learn a painful lesson. Nobody is untouchable. Maxwell Rothschild thought he was untouchable. He had controlled global aviation for decades, pulling strings behind the scenes, deciding who ruled and who fell. And now, he had made the biggest mistake of his life, coming after Naomi Carter. Because she wasn't just going to beat him. She was going to erase him. Naomi Carter didn't just fight back. She outplayed the game itself. That's why, instead of chasing Maxwell, she was sitting in a private villa in Dubai, drinking gold-infused whiskey, meeting with the only people richer than him. The Middle Eastern aviation giants. They had billions more than Rothschild. But Maxwell had kept them out of Western aviation for decades, using his political influence to block their expansion. Now, Naomi was giving them an opening. "You help me," she said smoothly, swirling her drink. "And I'll give you what Maxwell never would, access to the U.S. market." The men at the table exchanged glances. Then, the most powerful one leaned forward. "Make it happen," he said. "Deal. Sealed." 1 week later, Naomi sat in her penthouse, sipping champagne as the breaking news flashed across every channel. Maxwell Rothschild resigns after financial scandal. Naomi Carter's airline becomes industry leader. Jordan burst into laughter. You just took down $1 trillion dynasty. Marcus grinned through the video call. So, Naomi, what's next? Naomi smirked, looking out over the city skyline. Now, she murmured, I build a dynasty of my own.